All righty, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am verifying that my audio is coming through. Yep. All right. Wonderful. Um, Happy July 2nd, the second day of the second half of the year. Um, some of you may know yesterday was my birthday. I was born right in the middle of the year. The world celebrates my half birthday every year. It's called New Year's Day. Next time you are toasting people, you can just say, "Hey, we're toasting Parag's half birthday." I know that's a very special moment for most. Um, I will get on with the program because you don't want to hear me banter too long. I'm the Director of Professional Programs here at SASE, and the obvious question is, what is a SASE? So SASE is the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers, and what do we do at SASE Pro, the professional focus side, is we focus on this problem. Data shows that Asians are 50% less likely to get promoted than our white counterparts. I see a hand raised. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but you are welcome to toss a question in the chat or to Jessica, who can help you. So we are 50% less likely to get promoted to middle management positions, let alone executive levels. This creates a massive Asian leadership gap, which is a huge potential, not just for us as our community and individually, but also for the organizations that we spend our time with, right? So with that, when we've dug into this a bit more, we found 4 common factors. A lack of political and organizational savvy, cultural deference to authority, ineffective communication and influencing skills, and an aversion to risk-taking. Now, these are generalities. It doesn't mean that every single Asian automatically has this, and they are not necessarily unique to Asians. We have a higher percentage. It's a bell curve of bell curves. So we are more likely to have these, and they are culturally relevant and culturally driven. The challenge here, though, is that we have some barriers. One is just awareness of this challenge to begin with. Many Asians don't realize that there's an Asian leadership gap. Many non-Asians don't realize there's this thing called the model minority myth that ends up clouding the missed opportunity here. And the challenges that we face. Secondly, is what to do about it. And we found that providing leadership training with cultural context, is the key to unlocking the potential. Lastly, is the reality. We are low on the list from where to invest funds. Just looking at the numbers, and I get it. We are not the top of the pecking order when it comes to diversity initiatives or just focused group investment. I get it. So with that in mind, what we've done is pull together a pretty vast network of Asian ERGs, along with a vaster network of Asian trainers to develop programs, including this webinar series. This is a free series, and you are welcome to attend as many as you want. It runs monthly. You are welcome to share it with your friends as well if you like it. If you don't like it, don't tell anybody. The recordings will be posted on the website, and quite honestly, it's usually more than 2 months. Most trainers are more than fine with it staying up. You can look on the website for our historical ones if you'd like. And by virtue of being on this, you will be added to our mailing list unless you opted out and learn about the next ones. You can also follow us on LinkedIn for our programs. All right, with that, the way this works, we have a brief presentation with our direct training partner. Then there'll be moderated Q&A. We will actually take questions from the audience. So when you have a question, just pop it into the chat. And for this one, I will probably interrupt our trainer as we've discussed, as he and I have already discussed. And that's basically how it goes. So not a ton of hard-hitting content. It's intended to be a small amount so that we can actually converse and discuss it. All right. So with that, I'm going to introduce Ajit Nott. Ajit comes from Swagya Consulting. He was most recently at Corteva AgriScience. I'm guessing that there's a bunch of Corteva folks in the house, so you guys can go ahead and give a shout out in the chat and say hi to your former colleague. Ajit was introduced to me by Jess Truby, who is one of their Asian ERG leaders there, and we've had a fantastic conversation developing this content we like to call strategic communication for nerds. And with that, let me stop talking, and Ajit, take it away.
Thank you, Parag. And Parag, you asked me to introduce myself a little bit. I'll just describe a little bit more about myself. I grew up in India, did my PhD near Boston, did my postdoctoral work in San Diego, and then went back to India to set up a research facility at the DuPont Knowledge Center in Hyderabad. Did that for about 11 years. And then now I'm back in the middle of the US, which is Iowa, and talking to you from Johnston, Iowa, which is where Corteva is. I'm also a molecular biologist, which will explain some of the helices you'll see around the slide deck. I worked at Corteva for 17 years in various roles. Recently, about 3 months ago, I left Corteva to start my own coaching practice focused on leadership, team, and communication coaching. That will get us started. So first of all, I want to thank Parag for the opportunity. And also I want to thank him for the title, Strategic Communication for Nerds. I was sharing with him what I do for a communication framework. And he stopped me, he's like, stop, Ajit. We should call this Strategic Communication for Nerds. And I just loved it. Anybody I've used that title with has resonated with it. So hopefully you're not offended. You've claimed the title to Nerdship. And I'm really glad to be here. So what I will share with you is a process that I've found helpful to get concise, which I've called the Goldilocks process. And it's sometimes it's a balance between being too concise, which on the left you might just say very simple, and it's not understood information. And on the right side is a whole Wikipedia page of this quote, which has a lot of information, and it's not well understood if you have the time and inclination to go through that. So in the middle is a concise quote, which we can, it means something, it's understood, it triggers conversation. So what we'll do today is talk about how to get there. If you go to the next one. So before I go there, I was sharing some wisdom with my daughter a few years ago. I said, hey, stop talking before your audience stops listening. This is my way of imparting communication wisdom to her. So right back, if you click once more, Parag, and she says, I can do better than that, Dad. I stop before you start talking. So that's a bit harsh, but it also reflects a bit of reality. Sometimes our audience is just not listening even at the beginning and stay with it till the end. And I know this is a wonderful audience. You're all going to stay with me till the end, but just in case you're not, so here are the key takeaways. If you go to the next one. In order to be concise, take time to get clear first for yourself. Like, what is the core message that I'm trying to deliver here? As we saw in the first example, being concise requires cutting. And in order to cut, we need not to be attached to the data. We need to cut with discernment. Is this serving my purpose? Will this reach my audience? Number 3, we need to trade precision for utility. Like, we are trained to be precise. That's where we make our living. That's where we are scientists and engineers. We like precision. And a lot of times we forget that more precise is not always more helpful. So we need to trade that for what is useful. And finally, be direct and respectful. And this can be a challenge, as Parag mentioned. Number 2 in one of those reasons was this cultural deference to authority, and direct can be seen as disrespectful. And that's something we need to overcome. So if you go to the next one. So I've done a survey over the last 10 years where I've run workshops, communication workshops, and then I ask, what is effective communication? And these are the top 5 responses I get. It's clear, it's concise, it's understood, it's direct, and it's memorable. And for the purposes of our discussion today, we'll focus on number 2 and 3, which is being concise and being understood. As you can already see, it's a balance, right? I can be too concise and not convey information, or I can make sure I'm understood and be too verbose and not be concise. And what happens in that case, when I'm absolutely making sure I'm understood, then I'm losing attention. I think the balance is between being concise, maintaining attention, and making absolutely sure you're understood and losing attention. And all of us naturally have this desire to be understood. And if you're like me and you've learned English as a second language later on in your life, you probably have an accent. And what we do, we automatically, subconsciously switch accents in order to be understood without even knowing it. And that's a strong driver within us that we want to speak an accent that's familiar to our audience so that we're easily understood. And what we need to do is bring some balance, from being understood to what's minimal, what's necessary to be concise. In the talk, I'll also touch on being direct, which is one. Oh, I can do that too, is it? All right. So let's ask, what would Goldilocks do? And I used an example here of, let's say, a credit card proposal, which all of us, this example is from, if you're traveling in an airline to an airport, you see these flyers. You get 50,000 miles when you open a credit card. That's too concise. It's not enough information. And then on the other end is a whole legal agreement, which is like 20 pages long, which is way too much. And the legal agreements are trying to make sure they're covering all different aspects for all different audience, because the goal there is to be clear in case there is disagreement and you get taken to court. But that, of course, puts us off. When we see a huge document with lots and lots of things, everything, we lose attention. We're not looking for it. But what we need is to get back in the middle. If you click once more, what we need to do is go from the expanded version back to the middle, where what are the three things that I'm most interested in? What's the annual fee, what's the late fee, and what's the interest rate? And I just picked up three that I thought were interesting. There could be some other, there are top three. But what we'll leave out is something like what happens when you're late on your payments twice in a row. That's like a detail we can leave out that's not necessary at this point, and many others. So the process of being concise is takes the road from having a lot, you want to say, like Goldilocks, going from the small chair, which is uncomfortable, to the very large chair, which is too large and not comfortable, and coming to the middle and cutting content. If we go to the next one. So I have a question where I would request you to put on chat. What is your challenge in being concise? If there are a few shares on chat, would love to see them. Loss of precision, desire to share detail. Don't know where to draw the line. Wow, this is amount of information to share.
It looks like there's a common theme here of where do you draw the line? How do you determine what's essential and what's not essential?
Yeah, wonderful, wonderful.
Oh, I like this
Thank
one.
you.
I want to tell the story. I resonate with that extremely well.
I want to tell the story, and there's some value to that, right? Because we like stories, we are drawn to stories. I think what will be interesting is to see what's a story that's interesting to our audience. I think that will help us get to the better one. So with that, if you go to the next one, thank you all for sharing. Here's what I see is three obstacles to being concise, and maybe some of those are encompassed here, and some of them we'll deal with. The first one I find is the core message is often fuzzy to you. When I'm struggling to convey something in a concise manner, I've often found that the core message itself is unclear to me. And when it's unclear to me, it's very hard to make it concise for my audience. Number two is attachment to data. And I think some of you pointed out in the chat, there's just so much. As scientists and engineers in this group, you're creating content you're doing experiments, you're designing, you're creating stuff. And when we do that, we get attached to it and we find it hard to cut. So we stay in that and we want to show our story, like we want to share our story. And the third one, and this came up in the chat as well, is being precise. And we value precision above all else, right? We've been successful, we've come where we are because of our attention to detail. We are experts because that's where our livelihood resides, right? What happens is when we start valuing that over utility or understanding or audience's need, it gets in the way of being concise. So if you click once again, Parag, what happens is in the absence of a strategy, what we do is we take what I call the lazy expert strategy, which is I'm going to tell you everything and you decide what is relevant. Of course, your audience is unwilling and unable to do it. And the higher up in the organization, the more higher up leadership you're talking to, the less willing they are to give you the benefit of the doubt. And if they walk out confused, they walk out thinking you're confused. And that's a problem for a lot of us. So we need to take time to do that. So there is a more effective strategy. Perfect, but I'll keep going. There is a more effective strategy. So first, we need to take the time to get clear. All of us have heard this quote variously attributed to Mark Twain or Ben Franklin. Hey, I'm writing you a long letter because I didn't have the time to write a short one. And that's absolutely true. That captures the truth in there because it takes time and effort and intentionality to get clear on what is my core message. Number two, cut your content with discernment. And there are two things I'll share, two ways we can do that. We have a lot of content. How do we cut that content to get to the core message? Number three, trade precision for utility, right? Precision is good. We've got the results. We get to a point. We have an answer. And then we need to ask ourselves, what level of precision is necessary for me to achieve my communication outcome? In the next few slides, I'll share a little bit more about each one. Go to the next one, Parag. Yeah, the first one is take time to get clear, right? What is the single most important thing you want your audience to walk away with? And when I ask myself, I typically come up with 5 single most important things I want my audience to walk away with. And the important thing here is to write them down. Writing is by far the most underappreciated and most under-practiced skill in effective communication. What we have are fuzzy thoughts, cloudy thoughts, and being concise requires us to cut our long verbose thoughts. And we cannot cut a cloud. What writing does is freezes that cloudy thinking so that we can begin. Public speakers, TED Talks, all as effective speakers, they all have a script that they've honed and they've made concise, which is why they're very effective when they're ready to go. And we can all do that too. So writing our points helps us cut it down. Number two, cut with discernment, right? Ask yourself these 2 questions. Is this data critical for my communication objective? If I'm trying to move the needle, if I'm trying to get a decision, if I'm trying to get an answer, is point number 4 there really critical? Because the more we add, the less they hear. We lose attention, and we're vying for their attention at this point, the audience attention. The second question we need to ask ourselves is this point even going to be understood by my target audience? And that's not always a given. I mean, depending on who you're talking to, the level of detail you're sharing, it may not be something that will reach them. It might just fly over their heads, and that has a negative impact. They walk away. Our audience wants to. If we throw stuff at them that they're not going to understand, we kind of lose them. Yeah. Bottom line up front, exactly. Somebody said in the chat. So if you go to the next one, This is an important one where we need to be willing to trade precision for utility. We're all here, like I said, because we love the details. We are experts. We live in the details. We deliver in the details right at the bottom. If you're a chemist, you're looking at bonds, atoms, whatnot. If you're a plant scientist, you're doing, talking about weeds, like getting out of the weeds to the forest is the metaphor we use. But what we also automatically assume is that more detail, more precision is better. And that is not always true. So, and we find it hard to climb up, as it's called, the ladder of abstraction. And I'll often do this in workshop. I'll make a statement like mammals give birth to live young. When I say that and pause for a bit, if it's a biologically inclined audience, somebody will speak up, raise their hand and say, what about the duck-billed platypus? Yeah, mostly, exactly. What about the duck-billed platypus? Now, depending on who I'm talking to, let's say I'm talking to a 3-year-old, I really don't care about the duck-billed platypus. What happens is when we have to be concise, we have to climb up this ladder and make some choices, some statements that for our precise brain might feel inaccurate or wrong. And that's a trade-off that many of us find really hard to make. So we need to ask ourselves, what is the level of detail that's just sufficient to achieve our objective and stay with that? What happens is we know so many exceptions to the details, so many rules that our mind goes to the exceptions and say, oh, that's not true. That's not true. I can't really say that. And that's okay. We're not trying to hide the exceptions. We're just trying to climb up to a level that's useful for our audience. If you click once more, Parag. Yeah, the second question, will it be understood by our target audience? It needs to be asked again. If we are talking to our own work group, our team, we can stay in the weeds and be sure we will be understood. But as soon as you climb out of there, you go to your department or you go to a cross-functional team, you're subject matter expert on a cross-functional team where other people are experts from different areas. We need to climb up so that we explain our concepts more in a more easier to understand manner. And some are imprecise, incorrect, or wrong. And I think we need to make some of those choices.
So, Ajit, I want to probe on this one a little bit, and I'm sure for many of the others, they might be having a similar thought, is super nervous about leaving out an exception that might bite us in the butt later on, especially as risk-averse Asians, right? Or just being able to, say, no, I did call out that exception, in my 88-page document, but it didn't make the cut for the paragraph document, So how do you how have you found to be effective to tackle that? Because that's a very real fear. And it's not just for scientists and engineers, but you add the Asian component, it's like double or triple.
Yeah, that's a great question, Parag. Thank you for interrupting. I think what first thought that came to mind is we need trust, first of all, right? When you're doing that 88-page document, you're going to the legal document, which is like a cover your ass strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And if that's our goal, we can achieve that, but we're going to lose, right? But another answer to your question is we need to use discernment on which one of those exceptions might have a high impact, right, on this topic or on what we're talking about, right? Not every exception. And we need to highlight those as well. They may be part of the process or important for the decision making. Does that help, Parag? I can't see you anymore.
It does. I'm sorry, I'm turning my video off because we are still getting a little bit of choppiness, but so much of communication comes from What's the percentages, right? They say 7% comes from the actual words used, and so much more comes from tone and body language and so forth. Tone we still get from audio, but yeah. So I'm trying to manage it that way. No, I
Yeah.
appreciate that. Even all of this reminds me, and I'm curious, maybe we get a show of hands or whatnot into the chat. I distinctly remember a presentation I was giving to my 2-up manager, and I thought she was being super rude by saying, "Got it, move on, got it, move on." And I was just like, I spent all this time on these slides. No, damn it. You're gonna sit here and listen to my brilliance. I want my
Exactly.
respect. And in fact, I was shooting myself in the foot. And it wasn't honestly until this job, until after I left P&G, that I even realized what a royal screw up that was. That was possibly career limiting had I intended to get higher up. I mean, very possibly, because I left a terrible impression as a result because of my need to show that I understood to the nth level of detail. So yeah.
Exactly. And that comes to Parag, again, being very careful in our head. What's our objective? Is our objective to tell whoever our audience is everything we have done? Or is our objective to get to the next stage, like get resources, get funding, get whatever? That as long as our allegiance is to that objective, we can kind of back off. Your example reminded me of another thing I've said where at least you said, got it, next slide. This manager said, got it, go to your last slide, because that's where that's where the real summary is. So I tell my participants to bring your last slide up front, because if that's where your main deal is, give it to your leaders. They don't have time. Yeah, great questions. Great questions. And I'm not saying there's an easy answer to any of these, right? But there is a thoughtful approach and response to get to an answer that might work for you. If you go to the next one. So just to recap, first, take time to get clear for yourself. What is the core message here, including, like Parag said, some of the exceptions to what you're proposing. Attached to the outcome, the objective you want to achieve with the communication, not to the content you've generated or your slides, because you'll have to cut in order to be concise. And trade precision for utility, right? More precise is not always better. You need to see what level of detail is useful for my audience. Let's go to the next one. So in the next few minutes, I want to touch on another topic which is very relevant for this audience and also for most others, like Parag said, is being direct. One of the features I hear always in my service is effective communication is direct. Yet, if you click once more, Parag, we find, especially in Asian cultures, direct can be perceived as disrespectful. And how do we balance that? I don't want to be rude, but I also don't want to waste your time. And in last month's webinar, and Dr. Choi shared this example where there was this airline co-pilot who was being very respectful and did not want to directly tell the pilot that they were running out of fuel. Sometimes being indirect can have disastrous consequences, but it's something that we are conditioned, we have learned, we've grown up with this. It's something that we need to start practicing and learning and see positive feedback to do more of. So if you click once more, I have a poll question. And Jessica, I'm just curious about this audience. Let's imagine I've set up a short meeting with you. What approach would you recommend that I take to communicate with you effectively?
This is interesting. I would not have expected this close of a race. I don't know if that's what you were anticipating, Ajit, but
It is very close. Usually most audiences, other American audiences, I find 60 to 80% of the audience will say, be direct with me.
yeah.
right? And this is maybe on the lower side with this audience, but we want, but this is great. What this is telling us, what this is telling you is at least 58% of you, when I'm communicating with you, let's say I want you to watch my dog on July 5th for 8 hours. You want me to tell you first, hey, I was wondering if you can watch my dog on July 5th for 8 hours before I go into, oh my God, I have an emergency. I have to go here. I have to go there. So it's kind of, that's the context I use. So most of you will be okay if I use that approach. And I would take this as a fairly strong indicator that I can be direct in my communication with you and yet be respectful. If you go to the next one, actually, before you go to the next one, I have a story I want to share. There was a very elderly gentleman who was a very senior scientist, had been with the company for 30 years, who set up a 30-minute meeting with me. And in the 28th minute, he asked me if I would have the time and would be willing to lead a workshop at an upcoming conference. And I was counting the minutes because he was setting the stage, setting the context for 28 minutes. And my answer was going to be a yes. If he had said this to me in the first 2 minutes, I think we would have both saved us time and left and had a wonderful conversation. It's an extreme example of where there's extreme context setting and a lot of time is lost and we lose the audience attention. Let's go to the next one, Parag. Thank you. So there is another very good reason to be direct, because your audience is most attentive at the very beginning and then at the very end, because they know you're going to end and they can clap. And this is true for a presentation, for an email, for a document. If you think about it, emails you receive, your most attention is at the subject line. That's where you're paying the most attention. And you start reading line 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, your attention dwindles. And if you're holding your punchline to the middle, it's dead. So it's unlikely to be received with the damaging consequences for your effectiveness in communication. If you click once again, so what I suggest you do is be direct. Use the Romeo and Juliet strategy, I call it. Shakespeare tells us in Act 1 that a pair of star-crossed lovers are going to take their life. We know what's going to happen, kind of. And this hasn't stopped anybody from watching the play or watching it again and again. What's likely to happen is if you give your audience the punchline, tell them what you're going to tell them, put the bottom line up front, as somebody said in the chat, they're more likely to stay tuned and learn how. This is, I find, is amazingly hard for most people to do, is to be worried that if we give up the punchline, why are they going to listen to me? Like Parag said, hey, I made all these slides. You're not going to listen to me? Again, if you get your objective, if you get your if you get what you want out of the conversation, maybe they don't need to see all of it, and that's fine. So be direct, and it can be respectful. Let's go to the next one. So with that, I would like to summarize. To be concise, take time to get clear for yourself. Like, what is the core message here that I want to convey? What is it that I want to make happen as a consequence of this? Cut your content with discernment. Is it going to serve your objective? Is it going to reach your audience? Trade precision for utility. More precise is not always more helpful. It may turn off your audience and they will stop listening. Be direct and respectful. So with that, maybe click once again. I want to thank Parag and thank you for your attention. I want to special thanks to my workshop participants for helping me learn. And I deliberately made this unconcise. If you click once more, let's cut the content a little bit and get it clear. If you would like, if you're looking for a leadership team or communication coach, please email or scan the QR code to get in touch. And I would be happy to answer questions.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ajit, and for rolling with the punches here as we made some tweaks and adjustments. You know, one of the things that P&G was very famous for, so my career was at Procter & Gamble. One of the key things that P&G was very famous for is the one pager. And
Yeah.
there's even courses now taught on the PNG one pager, but it came down to exactly what you were talking about. And this was highly driven in marketing as well as R&D. We didn't do it as much in manufacturing where I was based, so I never learned that art, but it had everything to do with exactly what you're saying, is like, if you cannot distill it down to a one pager, you don't have your stuff together yet, because you haven't figured out how to be clear on what's really truly important. And this runs in contrast with, I think, what Landon might be writing here is, or maybe, in contrast with what we think about, like technical papers just being massive, right? And you have all the data and the appendices and this and that, the other, but you do still have an abstract. So I don't know.
Exactly. We forget that. The abstract is so critical. It helps your audience decide whether they want to read further or not.
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, and especially now since they're online, you do want to see the abstract first to decide whether or not you're going to download or pay for the service to download or whatnot. So, Lacey asked this question: how would someone practice these key skills? How do you track progress towards being a better communicator? So, what tips and how have you found that has been most helpful for people?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what I would suggest is start with an intention for every communication in mind. What's your objective? And once you've sent out that email or made a presentation, after that, sit back and reflect. Did the outcome match your objective? It's very simple. Did the questions kind of seem to indicate that I totally misread the audience or what they wanted? The level of detail. So sit back and reflect after. And we have so many opportunities here. Every time we open our mouth, we're communicating, right? So we can sit back and reflect and help ourselves learn every time. I'm trying to do A, B happened. What can I learn from it?
Yeah.
Or I'm trying to do A and A happened. Great. What did I do well? What worked well? So very simple process.
Bob, you raised your hand. I presume you have a question that you want to ask live. If so, go ahead. You'll need to unmute. There we go. Bob, we can't hear you. Oh.
Okay, I had to put my microphone down. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Sorry about that. Hey, it's really concise, really good presentation. I have big problem of making a short story long, which is exactly why I need to change it, because I'm a detail-oriented person. Okay, so this is really helpful. I need to post your bullet point in front of my screen and practice. Now I do have a question. Okay, one thing I need to, the second bullet point really helped me out. Cut the discernment, right? I need to cut a lot, but obviously number one, discernment. But forgive me that my English vocabulary is very shallow. Okay, so I really don't know what discernment is all about. So can you give me a little bit better definition and perhaps give me an example, of discernment that's actually not necessary and added to your communication. So can you kind of elaborate that a little bit so that I can sort of train myself? Yeah.
Thank you, Bob. That's a great question. In one of my earlier versions, I had cut with detachment. And I felt that was too harsh. I mean, we love our stuff, right? We're into what we generate. So discernment is kind of judgment, but with a little bit of intuitive judgment to say what level of detail here is important. I would just simplify it, Bob. Just ask those two questions, right? Is this data point serving my objective for this communication? Is this data point, is this additional line, is this going to be received by my audience? That's discernment, right? So you're stepping away from your content, what you've generated, and you're able to make objective choices on what to keep and what not to keep. So you're not attached in a sense. And if you know this, our managers can do this really well, and it frustrates the heck out of us, right? We can take the presentation to them and they'll just start slashing stuff because they're not attached. And they know what is it they want to achieve in their communication. But as we are attached and we feel, oh my God, somebody said, kill your darlings. Exactly. Because they're darlings, because we are attached to them. And it's hard. So I don't know. I'm not coming up with the exact dictionary definition of discernment, Bob, but it's just a way to ask yourself, is this going to achieve my objective? Data piece. And sometimes we need to define our communication objective very narrowly for that meeting. Is this getting a yes for another $100,000 or another $1 million to move these projects forward? Or is this like very specific decision is my objective? Then we can cut.
I like that example that you're giving with, when your manager slashes things, and my natural inclination as well would be to take offense. Like, why are you diminishing my phenomenal work, right? But knowing this, even with just what we've talked about, instead, if we see that as a gift of hey, it's a third party or second party in this case, maybe, who is knowledgeable enough, but is also can be detached, then maybe we are better prepared or primed to embrace it instead, whether it's our manager or a peer, and just say, hey, I'm having some trouble here detaching from all of this. This is what I will it down to. Can you help me? Can you glance at it? Can you whatever? Tell me where I'm going into too much detail. Maybe that would even, assist.
Exactly. Only thing I would add, Parag, to that is we often are not taught how to seek feedback.
Yeah.
Okay. Often we just go and I'll say, Parag, how does this look? That's not enough information for you to give me any useful feedback. So again, when you're seeking feedback, I would say, I need to tell you, Parag, I'm making this slide deck. My goal is to convince the head of research to give me another $100,000 to keep this. Now you have now I can look at that deck, man. I can tell you where you're just completely going to lose him or her. So then you can give me very useful feedback. So I think we have just let off the hook our own selves in this feedback equation, right? We need to be very conscious and intentional. Tell whoever we're seeking feedback from, here's what I'm trying to do. Will this work?
I got you. No, I think that's a great point. And no, I'm trying to figure out, Ajit, where were you 10 years ago when I could have used this? Like, seriously, man. Why didn't you work at P&G instead? In the comments, there was we were a little bit back and forth on TLDR, which is too long, didn't read. And
Yes.
it brought to mind when I did actually finally hear this feedback it was literally in the last 3 years that I was at P&G. My struggle is that what I found is that my gargantuan emails were actually a mechanism for me to process all my information and ensure that I really fully thought everything through. And so by jumping straight to the targeted, focused, nicely buttoned up, paragraph, I couldn't do it. And so I needed to write those emails out for me.
Yes.
Not so much for the audience. And so what I would do then is at the end, I'd have my summary because I've thought through everything through this process. That was just what worked for me. I'd take that TLDR, copy it up at the top. And I know nobody read the rest of it, but I'd just be like, hey, all the details are below if you're looking for it. But here's the basics. And all of a sudden people actually started reading my emails. But I found that process of maybe even the slide deck would be the same. The process of going through the slide deck and really rationalizing everything was very helpful for my own confidence in the content. But then there as well with the slide deck, you're going to get attached to it. And then you got to.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And that's really hard. It's really hard. I think one thing that got in my way, Parag, is I used to treat every communication opportunity as a performance review.
Yeah. Yes, that's a very good point. And sometimes they are when it is like somebody you don't present to ever. It is a unique opportunity, but that's where you should actually have multiple people checking your presentation. But if you're presenting to your 2-up manager every quarter, it doesn't need to be a performance review. That's a very good point. It's a very good point.
Sometimes the performance they're reviewing is your ability to communicate.
Ouch. Ajit, I feel so many daggers. I know they're not intentional, but you're like turning it.
Hey,
Ah!
I've felt all of them, and I've just taken them one by one. There are so many good questions on the chat. I just don't want to be disrespectful to all the people. If there's something that needs to come up, please feel free to share. Turn on your video.
I like
or
this one
audio.
from Sandeep. In your experience, how long have concise presentations or conversations lasted?
Thank you. This is a wonderful question. I had to share a story. There was a project I was leading, and we had to make a decision to stop something and save $500,000 before the end of the year in October, right? It was a clear decision. So I set up a 30-minute meeting with these two senior directors who didn't see eye to eye sometimes. So I was in this meeting, and I put my bottom line up front, right up front, that if we do this, we're going to save $500,000 a year. And here's the risk. If this happens, and then we want that benefit, we won't have it, right? I walked out of that meeting, and I'm not joking, in 11 minutes. That's all they needed to know to make the decision and move forward. They didn't care about the detail. They didn't care about what was going on. Like, all they needed to know, this was October crunch time. They wanted to make some decisions and money. All they needed was, what's the risk? Make this decision and go on. So I was shocked myself. I was a little courageous putting that up front. I was like, but it worked. So how concise? The higher up in the organization leadership you're talking to, the more concise they need to be.
Yeah.
I remember I used to call in from India to Pioneer's leadership team at that time to present RISE programs from there. It was 10 o'clock at night in India, and leadership teams, as they do, they were always delayed. I thought I had 15 minutes. In the end, I was keep pushing back, and then they tell me, okay, you're on, you have 5 minutes. I don't have time to go through my whole deck, right? That's another reason to be direct and put your bottom line up front, as somebody said. If their first slide is already what they need to know, you don't need to panic. You just show your first slide and end, and that's okay. That's a huge benefit to having your bottom line up front. Sandeep, I don't know if that addresses it. I think you can start from concise and then go into more detail if they ask for it. And that's also a good strategy to go in there.
Yeah, it's a little hard to say a specific time amount. I was, with the PNG one pager, it's one page, and not at 7 font, but at 10 font or 11 font or whatever the standard is. We've all played the font game before. Usually I was doing it the other way when I was told to write a 5-page paper. But Rusna asks, getting to the point of this is, how early should we ask for feedback to optimize the presentation? So, because that takes time, cycling through and so forth. Like, what have you found to be helpful from hey, if you got an important thing coming up, when should you start looking for feedback?
That's a great question. I would say before you get too attached to your deck.
It's not a time thing, it's an attachment thing. That's a good point. Yeah.
Because if we start working on the deck, it's something they're creating, and then the daggers just feel sharper when somebody says this slide is not helpful, not useful. So before you get too attached, share a shitty draft, share an outline.
I really like that one.
before it gets too, because we get ossified in it, and when the bone breaks, it hurts, right?
Yeah.
So share it at an earlier stage. And I would even say even before slides. So I tell, I used to be notorious for this. I love design, I love colors, I love fonts. I could spend all weekend just on design, which is a total waste of time if I don't have my content. So Rasna, I would say content is just postage, it's just paper. So I could draw up my presentation. Like if I have 10 slides, I could put a headline for each slide and just take that to say, hey, feedback, tell me, will this work? That's a good place to start, right?
I really love that. So Jessica's is laughing, at least to herself, because I've started this same. I saw this phrase earlier this year that I repeat for my entire team: commit to a shitty first draft. And it's similar, but a little bit different. The whole point is, many people can struggle to get started because they're wanting perfection or whatnot. And it's just like, if you just commit in your mind that whatever you're going to put out there is not going to be perfect, just get something down on paper. And so there's a similarity, but in this case, what you're saying is get the key concepts down on paper. That way you can cut and slice before you get too committed to it. So, but it's very similar. I like that. That's
Exactly.
right. So, I don't know if I'm missing any questions here. Yeah, I don't think I'm missing any questions. Actually, we're at 5 minutes anyway. So let me share my screen. And here we go. So Jessica, if you could fire up the poll. Hopefully, folks, you've found a lot of value out of this. We have spent 55 minutes of your time today, and we have 3 basic questions there, 1 to 10, that we ask every single time. So please scroll down and answer all 3. The next webinar, if I can get this going, is From High Fashion to High Tech, How this Silicon Valley Techie Turned Her Career into a 6-figure book deal. So with Kyla Zhao, that is live on the website now. Before you go register, we are possibly having to change the date on this one. So we will, before we send out a note to all the registrants, we'll get that squared away, and potentially you might have to nudge this way or that way. But super interesting young lady, Kyla, who has written now 2 books, 2 fictional books, and I think she's on their 3rd one, or actually maybe she just finished her 3rd one. In any case, we'll have a nice conversation about that. You can find us on the web at saseconnect.org/pro and learn more about all of our different programs that we have there to support Asian ERGs and Asian professionals. And definitely follow us on LinkedIn, where we share all of our programming, including this webinar series. Jessica will likely, by the end of the week, actually it's a holiday week, but very possibly by the end of the week, we'll have an email to you with the recording. You will have access to those recordings. All the recordings from prior webinars are also on our website, saseconnect.org/webinar. So we will get that information out to you, and that's all we have. So thank you so much, everybody. We have 131 answers to the poll. I appreciate that. 132. Oh, it keeps going up. Okay. And unless I've missed anything, if there's any last minute questions, I think we are good. All right.
Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Congrats, Ajit. Great presentation. And thanks, Parag. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jess. Good to
Thanks,
see
Thank
you.
you, everyone.